Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Maartje.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it.
Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are talking about Sonny Boy, a movie which came out in 2011. It's a Dutch movie, although to be fair, there's also some German in it and some other languages. But it is directed by Maria Peters, and it is written also by Maria Peters and Peter van der Waterbeent. And it's based on a book by the same name, and it was written by Annejet van der Zijl. And in English, this translates to The Boy Between Worlds, which is a really cool title, I must say. It was the Netherlands' official submission for the Best Foreign Language Film of the 84th Academy Award in 2012. It did not get on the short list, but it did submit it, so it didn't win. But the book is a carefully constructed and researched biography of Rika van der Lans and Waldemar Nods, who are a Suriname Dutch couple who had Jews and other quote-unquote undesirables during the Second World War in the Netherlands. And there's a quote at the beginning. I did not read this quote because I read it in Dutch, but Sam read the translation, obviously. And it says, official academic history has, as I said, nothing to tell us about the differences in intensity of historical occurrences. To learn more about that, you must read biographies. Not those of statesmen, but the all too rare ones of unknown individuals. And this is a quote by Sebastian Hafner, Song Defying Hitler, a memoir. So, yeah. What did you think of the book and the film?
I really enjoyed the book. It's nonfiction, but it reads like fiction. After the first chapter, I actually Googled it just to double check that it wasn't a novel, because it's written really beautifully. And as that quote alludes to, this is a biography about two nobodies, really. They weren't people who really would have gone down in history otherwise. They're just two people who quietly went about trying to save lives during the Holocaust and, didn't expect to be remembered. The movie is, I feel, a little bit hallmarky, like it's a little bit Lifetime movie. I wouldn't say that I liked it as much as the book, but it's a really interesting story, and the two main characters are super fascinating. So, yeah, I would say overall positive experience, book better than the movie. How about you?
I agree with you. The book is excellent. I read that Annejet van der Zijl actually wanted to write a novel and then realized, wait a second, there's actually a lot to this story, so I better make it a biography instead. Yeah, that's probably why she's so good at what she does. She's done this for lots of other people who actually existed too. And so I really enjoyed this book, and it's a rare thing that we both read the book and see the movie, so I really enjoyed getting to talk to you about it beforehand, but also in this podcast. And it's also strangely linked to my own family history, because these characters end up getting arrested and they end up in the same places that my grandfather was taken to. So there's a little personal connection there for me too. So yeah, I love the book. The movie was alright, the acting wasn't great. And I thought the film was a bit, because it tells their story from way before the war, it felt a bit long to me. And in the book, it flows really well. The movie is just not as snappy, I want to say. So, enjoyed both, but the book definitely more than the movie.
Yeah. If people want to read in English, you'll have to look up The Boy Between Worlds. It's only about 200 pages, so it's a really fast read. And I think that even if you're not someone who generally enjoys historical nonfiction, you'll probably like it.
Yeah, and there's the version that I read, a Dutch version from 2009, I want to say. It's like a special edition version. It also has another short story in it called The Dageraad, which is The Dawn, which is about, I have to say this correctly, Waldemar's grandparents on a plantation. So it kind of tells you their family history. It's quite a nice addition because you do also read about these people in the Sonny Boy book. So it's a good addition to the book. And there's also lots of photos because apparently Rika was very keen of taking photos of her family. So there's loads of photos that are still available. And maybe I'll just take some photos of the book and put them on the website because they're fabulous. And so strange too, because this was during the war, right? And they just went on with their lives. It's so weird.
Yeah, genuinely. And I think what's really interesting about this too is, as you say, when you're mentioning the other kind of short story, because one half of this couple is from Suriname, you get a lot of context in the book about the history of, colonialism and Dutch imperialism and slavery in South America. And so it is a story about World War II, but it has really fascinating roots and other elements of history as well.
Yeah. So let's get into the movie.
We get an opening card that says this film is based on true events. So the movie opens in Suriname in 1921. We get a little introduction to young Waldemar. He's going to be one of our main characters. He's a keen swimmer. We see him swimming along in this river that looks pretty fast flowing and pretty intense. And as he's swimming, he sees his father leaving town and he's like, "Hey, Dad, like, where are you going?" And his dad's like, "Don't worry about it. I'll see you later." It's just like, this is a recurring theme of his dad fucking off and abandoning the family, which will become like a character theme for him later when he's a dad and he has to make some decisions in this regard. But it's cool because, I didn't know too much about Suriname, and for the other people like me in the same boat, it was a Dutch colony from the 17th century onward. It was mainly sugar plantations. There were a lot of African enslaved people who were brought over there to work the plantations, and Waldemar was descended from those enslaved people. Suriname actually became independent in 1975, which partially was due to the fact that it provided aid to the Dutch government when it was rebuilding in the wake of World War II. And I gather it's the only sovereign nation outside of Europe where Dutch remains the official language. So I feel like in my part of the world, people maybe don't remember that the Dutch were also a colonial power quite as much as some of the other big ones. But yep, that was definitely happening too.
We were nasty. We talked about this offline. Like, we were the second to last country, I think, before the US to abolish slavery. So we weren't good, guys.
Yeah, it was pretty late in the game. But also, if all of those European powers participated in the slave trade and, benefited from it at some point. So it's gradients of badness, but it's all pretty bad.
Yeah. Also, I want to talk about something, and I think I'll just do it here. It's something that's in the book that really kind of confused me a bit. That the people in Suriname are so racist against their own people. They want to be white people so bad. And this really surprised me. Like, obviously, that's a little gift from their colonizers, like the Dutch, who treated them less than because of the color of their skin. But Waldemar's family is rich, starting out. And they can kind of get away with being not as black as other people are. But they speak about it quite a lot, about being as white as possible. So I thought this was a really surprising thing that I didn't really know about.
Yeah, that colorism, I think, is a hallmark of so many Central and South American countries. Suriname is sort of on the north coast of South America, like above Brazil, if you're picturing it in your mind. And I feel like so many of those countries, if you had a white parent or white grandparent, like even that much like whiteness might get you options in life that other people might not have had. So it was just, like you're right. It's pretty brutal to watch.
It's like internalized racism for your own race. It's so wild. But anyway, let's move on from that, shall we? 7 years later, Waldemar Nods, the older version, played by Sergio Hasselbank, goes to the Netherlands to study. Like, going to the Netherlands to study for the Suriname people is like the end goal. Like, they think this is heaven. They think they'll go to paradise if they go to the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is pretty gray. And I think the Suriname people in this story have a very, romanticized idea of what the Netherlands is. And it does offer them chances. Like, if he were to go back after he'd studied, he'd get paid more than different people who've done the same studies but in Suriname. So it's an ultimate pay raise just by going to the Netherlands.
I think he even gets to the Netherlands and they don't really recognize his schooling, or they don't recognize it as good as it is. They're like, yeah, you studied this, but like you studied it, not here.
True. They say you have to do an extra test to be able to go to university here. And little spoiler alert, but Voldemort ends up giving up on his studies just because they make it impossible for him to participate. We go to the village or city, I don't know, village, I think, of Goederede in the Netherlands. We meet Rika van der Lans, played by Ricky Kolen, who is a pretty big actress, I think, at that time. We meet her and she's still married to another man who is a councilman in the conservative area. And Rika, obviously, I say obviously, but Rika doesn't fit in. She has 4 kids, and her husband, called Willem, played by Marcel Hensema, is smashing the maid, is what Sarah's put. He's having an affair, pretty, like, he's not really trying to hide it. But Rika's, like, dancing on the beach, and she's, like, rebellious, and she doesn't really fit in within her own little family.
Yeah. And sort of the bigger background is that she didn't really fit in with her own family either. So she kind of ran off with Willem. Her parents were like, you shouldn't marry that guy. And she was young and she was rash. And she was like, I'm going to marry him anyway. And then he became kind of a stiff upper crust politician in this area that she didn't really want to live in. So the whole time she was kind of chafing at this life that she had chosen. And her parents were like, well, like, you chose this, you did it to yourself. And then obviously both of them are unhappy. He's having an affair. It's a whole thing.
I think one of them is Protestant and the other is like Catholic or something. Like, religion plays a big part of the story as well. So it's like she's choosing all the things she shouldn't be choosing in the eyes of society and her own family.
This is why, honestly, this is why in this day and age, when people are like, oh, it's so sad the divorce rate is so high. I'm like, no, it's not. That's a great thing. If people are unhappy, they should be allowed to get divorced. This would have solved so many problems in this situation.
Yes, agree.
So we sort of skip to another location. We're in The Hague. Rika has left Willem and taken the kids. As you can imagine, he's not super thrilled about that. I don't think he wants to be raising kids by himself, but also that's like a big saving face thing. Like, if your wife fucks off and takes the kids, like, people are like, wow, he must have really sucked. Like, what was their marriage like? And no one thinks this is a good idea. Her parents and her brother are like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you can't just take the kids. Like, what do you think's going to happen here? What does the future look like? You don't have a job. So she's definitely uprooting her whole life, but she's so unhappy that she can't really see anything else to do.
I feel like she does this quite a few times during especially in the book, I want to say. She makes choices and then regrets them and then makes different choices. That's what she does in the book quite a bit. But she's also really brave, right? To be a woman and to just pick up your life and decide that you deserve better is brave stuff, especially in those days.
Yeah, huge.
So when Waldemar, after he's been on the boat that he's been chasing as a boy, he's now on it, that's going off to the Netherlands. He's been on the boat and he gets off it where he meets his cousin, who is actually his half-brother, but he doesn't want anyone to know. David Miller, played by Rogier Komproe. He has trouble setting in with them because everybody is racist as fuck.
Yeah, gosh. In the book, they reference this a bit more, but even David's wife, who is white, is not a huge fan of having her husband's cousin/half-brother stay in the house. Everywhere he goes, where he interviews to get into school or to get a job or whatever, people are just really shitty to him. If you guys thought that the Netherlands was going to be a paragon of progressivism in the 1940s, you were incorrect.
And just to be clear, David Miller is also black, but still his very white wife doesn't really like black people. So
yes. This is why when people are like, oh, I have black friends, or like my such and such relative is black, it's like, that doesn't preclude you from being racist.
And in the book, it's weird. I think in the book, Rika and someone else in Waldemar's family are actually related to each other. Like, he comes to meet Rika in a slightly different way because...
Yeah, doesn't she know Christine or something? I don't really remember what it is.
I don't remember either, but I think there's some distant relation between them. Like, in the movie, we'll get to it in a second, because I'll just do the next one, because then it'll make sense. Like, Waldemar can't stay with his cousin, so he's kind of looking for another place to stay. And Rita moves into a new house, and outside of that house, she meets Waldemar, and he becomes her brother. And he does pretty well within the family. But in the book, like I said, he gets referred to her by some family member or other. I don't really understand. But there's a relation there somewhere. I don't mind this way of meeting, but the acting in the scene where he meets her is so... I don't know if you can tell because it's Dutch, but it's so bland. He makes a quip at her where he kind of asks about a room and she says, well, I'm moving. And then he replies, well, if it's already rented, then you can just tell me. And he's actually implying, well, if you're racist, then just tell me you don't want me in your house. But the acting is not great.
No, it's funny. Like, this is their meet cute, I guess. And it's like they couldn't really decide what they wanted to do with the scene, like what they wanted the vibe to be.
Yeah, for sure.
He does sort of hang out with her and the kids. It's sort of unavoidable because he's living in the house with 4 children. But the kids, especially the older ones, are having a really hard time being separated from their dad. It's like the typical divorced family thing of like, why did you take us away from dad? Like, why can't you make it work? Why can't we go back there? Obviously not really seeing the full picture.
No, and it's kind of cute. Rika, in the book, they mentioned this a bit more, but there's a thing where she makes him food, Waldemar, and she learns how to cook rice because he doesn't like potatoes, which is all the Dutch eat. So she specifically learns how to cook rice, which is what they eat in Suriname a lot. So that's how their relationship grows and develops into a full-blown affair. And they see the movie The Singing Fool, and the song Sonny Boy by Al Jolson sticks with them and they sing it a bit.
Yeah, and it's going to become important later, obviously, as you know, from the title of the film. But I did laugh at this scene because the person singing it in the movie is definitely wearing blackface. And I was like, oh, it literally just like cuts into this scene where there's someone singing in blackface. And I was like, aha, okay.
Yeah, and Waldemar doesn't take offense to this. He's like so used to it, I think. I find in general, Waldemar's character, both in the movie and the book, he's a very like demure would be a good word for him. He's very laid back and quiet, and he doesn't really speak up for himself or anyone else. Like, he doesn't want to make any waves.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then, like, Rika's kind of she's the one who's larger than life, who has, like, so much love to give, who's, you know, just such, like, a great mom and just someone whose personality is really big, and his personality is, like, you know, sort of accommodates that.
Yeah. He's 19 or 17 years younger than she is.
Yeah, I think he's, gosh, what is he, like 19 or 20? And she's like in her late
19 when he gets there, and then 20 or something when they hook up.
Yeah, it's like a 17-year age difference. And like, you got to think too, like, obviously you and I are in our late 30s, not to date ourselves, but like, I think that in that era, like that would have seemed very like advanced in years, right? Especially because she's a lady with 4 kids. Like, people in their minds are like writing this woman off as a sexual being, right? They're like, she's an old lady. She's done with all that.
An old maid.
Yes. They start having this affair, and they're a bit sort of hot and cold. Like, they're both kind of realizing that this is, you know, they have the first blush of love, which is great, but also there's like the practicalities of like, this is an interracial relationship, and this is a very complex situation because she's trying to get a divorce from her husband. So Rika actually finds out that she's pregnant. It's obviously Waldemar's kid. And there's a scene where she goes to the doctor and she's thinking of getting rid of it, but she ultimately decides not to do that. And she also gets a letter from her husband, Willem, saying that he won't give her a divorce because he doesn't want her to move on with her life, and he's kind of an asshole.
Yeah. And also you said doctor, but it's like a back alley doctor. Like, it's, I don't think it's a doctor.
Yeah, although there would have been, you know, doctors doing that kind of stuff back alley too. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, I don't know.
At this point, we're still way before the war. It's May 1929. And Rika tells Waldemar she's pregnant. And Wim, named after his father, their oldest son, has kind of figured out that they are in a relationship. And he doesn't really like it. So Waldemar is a little bit upset because Rika had lied to him about the pregnancy. So he moves back in with his cousin David. And he's also upset because Rika doesn't want to be open about their relationship, which I can't really blame her for, because obviously people will not be cool with that.
Right. It's not just the interracial thing, it's also the 17-year age difference and the fact that she's technically still married to someone else.
Yes. Now, I feel like this is another one of those. Waldemar doesn't really, I don't want to say he doesn't care, but he doesn't really see the consequences of some of the things he's feeling and wanting and all that. Yeah, maybe he's hopeful. I want to say he's a hopeful man at this point. So.
He is. And I also think that in Suriname, where he's from, enslaved people were not allowed to get married. And so a lot of, like, historically, what would happen with Black families is, you know, like, I might have kids with, like, this guy, but they wouldn't necessarily, like, have his last name. And then I would also have kids with this guy. And so, like, you wouldn't really have the sort of formal structure of you marry someone, you take their last name, and that's how your kids inherit all the stuff that people would be used to in Europe. And so I think he's, like, a bit less tied to this. To him, it's not as big of a concern that she was married to someone else before.
True. They do say it in the book quite a bit, too, that where he's from, like, monogamy and all that sort of thing isn't as common as it would be in Europe.
For sure. Now it's September 1929. This is a few months later into the pregnancy. Wim and Jan, who are the two older of Rika's kids, they run away from home. They go back to their dad. I'd call them the older kids because they are, but they are still like, 10 and 8 years old or something. They don't really have the emotional tools for the situation. Willem comes back to Rika. He's got a new job. He says, look, if you get back with me, then things will be better. They'll be different. A little bit of saving face on his part. But then he sees that she's pregnant. He thinks about leaving, but then he's like, no. He's like, listen, I'll raise the kid as my own. And then Waldemar comes in the room and Willem knows right away that that's the dad. And he's like, look, no one's going to believe that kid is mine. So he fucks off. You can't really blame him. And then, Rika has a bit of a hard time. Even her brother Marcel, who had helped her find somewhere to live after her divorce, played by, can you say his name?
Mika Helshoff.
Perfect. Yeah, even her brother abandons her. So she definitely goes through a little bit of a dark period.
Yeah, it's just everybody abandons her. To be honest, Willem, her husband, he's a dick, but also they're also his kids. So I feel like in a book, he's less of a dick than he is in the movie, even though he's sleeping with the maid. Like, they're unhappy, right? They're both unhappy in their situation. And he's definitely still the bad guy, but I don't think the situation is super black and white either.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it just sucks because it's like he was having an affair first, and she's the woman who starts
true.
After they're separated. Now she's the one who's going to have to wear being an adulterer, even though she did not start this shit. And we'll get into this later, but he lets her see the kids once a year. Like, she doesn't get to have them on Christmas. She doesn't. It's like he punishes her for doing this, quote unquote, to him.
A little bit later, baby Waldy is born. He's a beautiful brown mixed race baby. And the landlord doesn't really like it, so he kicks them out. And Waldemar pawns his very precious camera that he got from home. And he likes taking photographs, but he goes to a pawn shop to get some money so they can afford rent. And his mother, we see a flashback of his mother doing the same thing after his father left him. So there's a bunch of flashbacks in this to his life and the parallels with his life on Suriname. So interesting movie choice.
I did like that they did that in the movie. I feel like it explains his actions a little bit more. So many people around him, particularly his family, are asking him why he's sticking around for Rika and the baby, because they're like, look, in Suriname, it would not be anything if you just fucked off and like abandoned them. Because, like, what do you owe this woman? And even in the Netherlands, their relationship is really hard just because, like, socially it's so unacceptable. So I feel like them throwing in these flashbacks to him being raised by effectively a single mom after his dad left and all the difficulties and fallout from that really informs a lot more of who he is. Whereas in the book, because he's such a sort of more laid back personality next to Rika, I find like you don't get as good of a sense of who he is as a person.
No, he's Rika's shadow almost. She's very, like you said, she's larger than life and she's outspoken and cheerful and she's got loads of character and he's barely there in the book, even though it's a book about both of them. So I agree. And also, I think they really, really did love each other quite a lot because, like you said, he had every choice to just leave and go back to Suriname and everything would have been fine. But they are dirt poor. They have no money. And he can barely he has a job, I think, at this point, but it doesn't pay very much. So their life is hard, and still he decides that he wants to stay for this kid and this woman as well. So it's pretty admirable that he makes that choice, even though in this country it would have been likelier that he would leave. So.
Yeah, I think, too, the movie depicts them being homeless for a little bit, which I don't think is true. Like, in the book, they did sort of shuffle between housing a little bit, but I didn't get the sense that it was as bad as they showed it in the movie, but...
No, and there's also an entire thing, we'll get to it in a minute, that doesn't happen in the book at all.
So, Willem, the ex-husband, takes full custody of the younger kids as well. And when I say full custody, like, man, she gets so little visitation. It's brutal. And she's not allowed to visit with them at her house. Like, that's one of the restrictions. So she goes to pick them up at the train station like once or twice a year. And then she has to like take them to a museum or something. And Rika, Waldemar, and little Waldy, they're really struggling to find housing. And then they meet Sam, played by
Fritz Lombergs.
There it is. Who is a friendly old man, and he sees that they're in need, so he puts them up in a little room over this bar that he runs. And Sam is an entirely fictional character that does not appear in the book. So I just was like, where are we going with this one?
It's also, I think he's Jewish, which is, yeah, it has a point in the movie that he's Jewish because Waldy gets to be quite fond of him. So Waldemar's sister Hilda comes to visit. She's played by Joy Wilkins. She's his kind of also rich sister from Suriname. And she disapproves of his life and she cuts him off because they've been sending him an allowance. And even she's like, look, I don't approve of your life or this woman that you're with. So you get no more money from us. Everybody abandons them at this point. But Waldemar swallows his pride and he gets a job via David. And he actually gets to buy his camera back. And I don't know if this happened in the book, I can't remember. But I loved this moment. I thought it was so nice that they got a little semblance of normalcy back.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because in the book, his sister is married to, I want to say like a diplomat, and then they go to live in, is it
Dutch India, I think, at that point.
Yeah. Indonesia, I think, right?
I have to look it up on the map.
Because the Dutch, like Indonesia was a Dutch colony, but India was not.
Yeah. It's not India, but it might have been that Indonesia wasn't called Indonesia back then. It might have just been the Dutch Indies.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. The Dutch, you're right. It would be the Dutch Indies, which is like present day
Indonesia. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. There we go. Clear enough. Yeah. And which also, I don't know if everyone, what episode, I don't remember if we talked about this on the pod actually, but it's from a book that I read. The Japanese took over the Dutch East Indies, I guess, for a little while. And then at the end of the war, when the Japanese left, the Dutch people who had been running the place got let out of the concentration camps where they had been put. And that's when the locals decided, fuck you guys, we're taking our country back. And a lot of Dutch people had a real bad time in Indonesia at the end of the war.
Yeah, it was a really bloody... It was a proper war after the war, I think. Not good, but then again, colonizing is not good either, so... Yeah.
Little fun side plot that Waldy's sister Hilda and her husband go through. So we flash forward maybe 5 years or so. Waldy's like a proper kid now. He's not a baby anymore. Rika is working the bar at Sam's when he gifts her with a guest house called the Pension Walda at... How do you say this place?
Scheveningen.
Oh my God. How do you say the English accent?
I don't know, my friend.
Perfect.
Yeah, just say that wrong place by the sea.
Yeah, by the sea. And this I also thought was like Like in the book, they get shunted around to different houses, but eventually they buy their own guest house. And so this like plot element of adding Sam in, I feel like was, I don't know, just to give them sympathetic like Jewish person that like later on when they start doing what they do, it like provides a bit more like motivation, I guess. I don't know. But Waldemar flashes back to his childhood, and his mom actually had to rent out rooms in their house after his dad left them. So it kind of reminds him of that.
Yeah, and also in the movie, they kind of streamlined this a bit because Pension Walda isn't the first pension they run. Like, they start out much smaller. They start out within a different house, and it's only a couple of places. And what we don't really get to see in the movie, but get a bit of a sense for in the book, is Rika's absolute savvy business sense. Like, she has no money, but she will find a way to get money. And Waldemar doesn't really have a role in this, I don't think. It's all her. She's just a great businesswoman. And also at some point, she gets staff. And she's so proud of the staff. Like, there's pictures in the book of her with the staff. And she sends those to the children saying, Mommy and her staff.
Well, if you think about like the era that they lived in, because pretty much this whole time Waldemar has a job. He's working like some kind of bank job. And at the time, like one of the very, very few ways for women to make a consistent income was like to run a boarding house, to have boarders, to like rent out a room, and you clean the room and you make breakfast for the person. And like that was a way for women to make money where they could like still hang out at the house and like look after the kids and stuff. Even when, they just have one or two little rooms to rent out, Rika's hustling. She's trying to get people in the door. And they had, a guest book that people would sign, and like pretty consistently people would say they had a great experience. They loved it. Rika was so friendly. They loved, little Valdi. They loved the breakfast. She's always bragging that they had a sea view, even when they were like really, really far from the sea and you could only see a little teeny tiny bit of it out the window. Like she would advertise the hell out of those rooms.
I feel like the first pension, like the smaller pension, was far away from the sea, but actual Pension Walda is right on the seaboard. So the later one is right there. But also something you don't really get to see in the movie as much, but you get to read about in the book. Like, Scheveningen as a sea town is very popular for German tourists, so she gets a lot of Germans in her boarding houses, and they love her. Like, the Germans love her so much, and she loves them too. I feel like Rika, even during the war, we'll get to that when the war starts, it's soon, but she's very friendly. And she's the best in probably most people, even the Germans, when they get stationed at their house. The movie takes a little bit of a different direction there, I feel. But the book is she's very friendly to everybody. She just wants to take care of people.
Yeah, 100%.
And so Bertha and Hank, which are the two youngest children from her marriage, come to visit, but it doesn't really go well. Also, because they're not supposed to stay, I think, at her house, and she makes them stay at her house. So Rika goes to Willem's house, her husband's house, to confront him after he gets a court order that says that she cannot see her kids for 2 years, which actually did happen. It's horrible.
Yeah, it's brutal. And the whole time in the book, too, you are getting a sense for the like really different relationships that she's ending up with the kids. Like the oldest two sons want nothing to do with her for a long time. The daughter keeps in pretty close contact with her and is like very sympathetic towards her. And the youngest son is like so young. He's like 5 or something when, the divorce gets finalized, that he doesn't have like a great memory of her being his mom and them all living together in the house. And it's such a huge part of her life. Like even when she can't see the kids, she's writing to them constantly.
Yeah. In the book especially. We get a lot of those letters in the book as well. And what's funny about Rika in the book, I find, that all the choices he makes, like having the kids stay in her house, he knows it's a bad idea, especially the second after she's done it. She's like, oh shit, shouldn't have done that. And also she's constantly like, when she's picking up the kid, she's like waving at her husband, like tauntingly like that. And that was just who she was. She just wanted to be her own person, and she was a little sassy for sure.
Yeah, definitely. We get a little scene where Valdi is sick, and Waldemar flashes back to his mom when she was sick with appendicitis in the hospital, and Rika wonders if they're being punished by God. It's like kind of a low point for them.
Yeah, Rika is very religious in the book. More than in the movie. You don't see it as much. But the book kind of makes it a point to remind you that she's religious on numerous occasions. At the same time, Waldy does get better, by the way, thank God. He survives. Because Waldemar's mother did not survive. She dies. But their son survived. So again, Rika does then also think that's a sign from God. So first God is punishing them and now he's saving her son. So she's very pleased. But it's the summer of 1940. So the war has begun and Nazis fill the guest house. And I thought this was interesting because in the movie, Rika does not want to let them in. And it's Waldemar who's like in perfect German, by the way. He speaks German. Tells them that they're very welcome to stay in the house because he knows if they're going to make a scene that they'll be in trouble and he doesn't want trouble. So I did like this. I don't know if it's in the book or not. I don't think it is, but I liked what they did there in the movie. But Bertha and Hank visit again the two youngest children, and to much of their mother's happiness and surprise, they bring Jan, the third boy who didn't want to see her for a while. But I think, is this the point where he's engaged and his dad has kicked him out of the house?
Yep.
Yeah. So Jan is engaged, I think, again to a girl with a different religion than them. So that's why his dad's like, nope, you cannot stay in the house anymore. So he kind of comes running back to mommy a little bit. But Rika's very happy to have him there. Like, she's in the book, she's convinced that she'll be with all her children again. She loves this kid. She does everything she does. She says she does it for the kids.
Oh, yeah. She's, and even when the older kids are mad at her and they're not answering her letters, and it's like literally years of radio silence because they won't come and see her either, it doesn't stop her. Like, she is still constantly writing to them all the time.
And sending them gifts through Bertha. Bertha's like the little good girl who has to send all these presents on to her brothers.
Yeah.
And she doesn't have any money for gifts, but she'll get them gifts anyway.
Yeah. It's May 1942. Time is progressing onwards. Things are getting worse. Rika is sewing stars on Sam's clothes. He's thinking, while he's debating if he should get out of town or not, because things are starting to look bad for Jewish people, but he ends up sticking around. Rika and Waldemar get ordered by the Germans to evacuate their guest house because it's in a strategically sensitive area. As you can imagine, they're right there on the beach, and this area of coastline is going to become an area that the Germans might have to defend if they get invaded by the Allies. And so the Germans end up knocking down hotels and all this beachfront property so that they can build Hitler's Atlantic Wall, basically.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't looked it up, but I think the building that the pension was in is still there. But it's like right on the beachfront. So this is a bad time for Rika and Waldemar anyway, because the city had been closed down. So tourism wasn't there, so they didn't make any money anymore. So they really did not want to leave, because if you remember, Waldemar is a very keen swimmer, and being at the sea is like the happiest he's ever been in the Netherlands. So this is a very, very bad time for Waldemar specifically.
Yeah.
Now we come to a bit of an embellishment from the movie versus the book, but Rika is asked to hide some Jews upstairs in their new house by Kees Chardon. His code name is Paul Verlier, played by Thomas Commart. And Kees Chardon was a very well-known, but he wasn't kind of been forgotten a little bit until the book and the movie. But Kees Chardon was a resistance fighter, and he saved a lot of people, specifically a lot of Jews in the Netherlands. So they kind of make it seem in the movie like he comes to them in the church and that they all go to, and he tells her, look, do you want to make some money? And then he says, well, you can hide some people, but if you hide Jews, then you'll make more money. And it didn't really occur to me until someone pointed it out to me that it kind of takes all the power away from Rika. I don't know why I didn't notice it when I first watched it. I had to go back and look at it again. But yeah, I think they've done this to be able to keep Kees Chardon in the movie for the rest of the movie because he's such a big Dutch figure. But this is not how it went in real life.
Yeah. And I'm not mad that they included him. Rika and Waldemar risk their lives to do this. And I don't love the implication that like they literally never thought of it until some guy was like, hey, you want to make $500 or whatever? And then they were like, oh, why not? Like, Rika had her kids' lives to worry about too. And I like in the book, it gives her a little bit more credit, I guess.
Yeah. And recently a book came out about this guy, about Dutch-Surinam, which I also bought. And I didn't read all of it, but I kind of flipped through it to see if there was any more detail about how they met, if this was based on any rumor that they met that way. But they did work together quite a lot. They were like partners in crime for a bit. But they were working around the same area a lot. So I think that's why. But Rika and Waldemar specifically were so good for hiding Jews because they had a happy marriage. And those were the best kind of hiding places, because when there's like trouble in the house, things always go wrong, apparently.
Yeah. I really like the quote in the book where they say, in general, happy marriages made for better safe houses because love, unlike suffering, is much more likely to inspire noble deeds.
Yeah, that's great. That's lovely.
Sam, their Jewish friend, the bar owner, gets taken away. Valdi sees it and it's extremely traumatizing. He runs home and he discovers the people that are hiding upstairs. Obviously, Rika and Waldemar had been keeping it from him because kids aren't necessarily great secret keepers, and it keeps him safe a little bit more if he doesn't know. But yeah, he discovers it, so now he knows. Cards on the table.
Yeah, and I think part of this scene, I don't remember exactly if it was this scene or another one, but Baldy gets into a fight with some white boys who call him dirty words. And it's NSB officers, Dutch police officers that work for the Germans that bring him home. And Rika's like panicked for a second because she's like, what the hell is going on here? But Waldy's a little firecracker. He's wearing I want to say it's a Boy Scout uniform the entire time when he's this age. He's so proud of this too. And he's more like his mom, I want to say, than his dad in the movie at least. He's outspoken and funny and not quiet.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he gets into shit for wearing his Boy Scout uniform too, because the Germans don't want there to be organizations for kids to participate in other than Hitler Youth adjacent shit.
We don't see any of those in the movie, by the way, but they were very prevalent and there during this time. Just young people joining the Hitler Jugend, thinking it would be a fun time.
Yeah. Also, I was glad that they mentioned this in the book because I also didn't know too much about it. But in the book, the author mentions that, of course, the Germans, the Nazis, being the Nazis, thought that Black people were inferior, but there just weren't really enough of them to bother having a policy in place like they did with the final solution. And so they generally just left Black people and other people of color alone. I personally didn't know what the sort of Nazi rules were around that. So I was glad that it did get mentioned in the book.
Yeah, it's almost funny the way it got sad. There just weren't enough of them. Weren't enough of a problem for the Nazis to be nasty about them.
Yeah, exactly.
We skip forward a little bit again. It's October 1943, and Rika hides an SS deserter Gerard van Houwelingen, played by Wouter Schmeers. And I say SS deserter, but he's a Dutch guy that joined the SS, so he's a big traitor to the Dutch people, let that be known. But this guy, I think he was only 17 or something when he joined, and he was joining for the reasons we've mentioned on other podcasts before, thinking it would be a better life. And then he came to be in the SS and realized that, wait a second, it's actually quite bad. And he deserts when he gets injured, I think. But he makes friends with Waldy, and it's a bit... He plays the guitar, and he's funny, and he talks to Waldy a lot. But there's a bit of an edge to him that makes him a little bit untrustworthy, and I think it's done on purpose. And meanwhile, Waldemar proposes taking the family back to Suriname, as it is a lot better still there than it is in the Netherlands, but they don't go.
Yeah, this SS deserter guy, he's number one. None of the safe houses want to hide him because they're listen, even if he did actually desert the SS and he's not just a plant who's going to get us all killed, we don't want fucking SS dudes in our house. And so Rika took him in because Rika would, she was a sympathetic person and she had compassion for everybody. And after the war, Valdi was convinced that, this was the guy who ended up getting them in trouble. And so, yeah, they give him like a bit more of a role in the movie. So we get to know him a little bit better than you do in the book, I find.
Yeah, it's true. So in the book about Gay Chardon, who's actually also gets ratted out, this guy is in the book. He's got a different name, which I think has to do with a lot of these people's names were only just released this January, so they were kind of kept in locked archive files before now, so I think we only just learned this guy's actual name. But in his interviews, he doesn't rat out Rita or Waldemar, but he does rat out Chardon almost by accident. Like, this guy's a young guy, and he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, it seems to be. And he just makes an innocent little quip about Chardon and where he lives to the SS. Very good idea, guy.
January 1944, they end up getting caught. The Germans bust into the house. They find the people hiding upstairs. The whole family gets arrested. Valdi gets sent home after his parents' arrest because he's still a kid, right? He's 8 years old or something. And he goes home. He has both of their wedding rings in his hand. And he goes into the house. He retrieves some of the items they previously hid under the floor, including his father's precious camera. And then he goes to his uncle Marcel. If you'll recall, Marcel is Rika's brother from the beginning, who kind of helped her out after the divorce and then kind of bailed on her when she got pregnant. But he does, when Valdi comes to him, he does take him in.
Yeah, he's the only one at this point. I feel like in the book, it's a little bit clearer that the family, even though first abandoning them, get kind of curious specifically about Valdi. So they want their grandson in their lives, like her parents especially. But what was I going to say? I was going to say, oh, there's this guy in this. He's wearing SS pajamas.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
It's probably just like a shirt and just an undershirt or something, but it just says SS on it, very big.
You're right, that did crack me up. And then when he hears them bust into the house, you best believe he took that thing off real fucking quick.
I don't know, I thought this was really weird. Why would he wear that?
Maybe when he ran away, he only had the clothes on his back, right? So he probably couldn't afford to be throwing away a perfectly good shirt.
It's just so weird. Anyway, Rika gets interrogated at the Orange Hotel, the Oranje Hotel, where many political prisoners are held. And this is actually it's called a hotel, but it's a Nazi prison. And this is the prison where my grandpa was held for 5 months. So pretty long time, and conditions here are terrible. She denies all association with Chardon because she doesn't want anyone to be caught. And even under torture by a very brutal Nazi called Keeskaptein, played by Ruben Brinkman, what a fun role to play. This guy's very, very, very evil. And the Nazis go to pick up Valdi as leverage, but the family hides him, thankfully, and they take him out to the countryside, and there he'll be safe for a bit. So I looked up some information about Keeskaptein, because he was a Dutch police officer, but he joined the NSB and then the SS. And he's a dickhead, and he worked in The Hague, but he was known for his violent and particularly inhumane torture of Jews. So after the war, he was sentenced to death and executed in 1949. And he was one of the few Dutch policemen to be actually on trial like this and to be executed. So once again, the Orange Hotel, the Oranje Hotel, got its name because there were so many Dutch resistance people kept there.
You can go see it, right? You're going to go see it, you were saying?
I'm going to go see it. Most of my family members have already been there recently, and I've not been yet, so I'm going to go see it, and I'm going to try and make some, voice notes. As we have lots of information about the cell that my grandfather stayed in and how long his stay was and all that, but the museum doesn't know any of it yet, so they will be keen to hear it because not all people in this Orange Hotel are accounted for. So it's pretty amazing watching this movie, but also reading the book just gave me chills sometimes. Because even though, like, the time periods kind of match up to when my grandfather was there. So I'm like, you could have seen each other, you know? It's wild.
That is wild. Wow.
So Waldemar is moved to Comfort, which is another place my grandpa stayed in. And Rika is sentenced to life in prison, which is pretty horrible. And on May 10, 1944, she also arrives at Comfort, and there's a letter in the book about this, where she's very happy to be going to Comfort because she knows that Waldemar is there, so she'll be able to see him. And Comfort, by all means, was not a bad camp. They had, like, proper rules, and there was good communication, and they had good food. So all in all, it wasn't too bad a time over there. So most resistance people were glad to be going there and not somewhere else.
Well, unfortunately, Waldemar doesn't get to hang around. He gets moved to Neuengamme concentration camp. He gets a job sorting mail because he's multilingual. And in a lot of these places, if you had a job that was not manual labor, you were significantly more likely to survive the war because they wouldn't literally work you to death. And because he has this job, he also manages to sneak some letters to his son. Unfortunately, though, no one has heard from Rika. Neuengamme is actually the largest concentration camp in northwest Germany. 100,000 prisoners came through there, of which 42,900 died, which is pretty grim and stark. That's a large percentage. It was used to intern SS and Nazi officials after the war, and it was actually made over into a regular prison that operated for over 50 years. But now, if you go there, the site is a memorial.
Waldemar actually was lucky because his job kind of afforded him better barracks as well, so he had a better place to sleep and better food. Like, his job, he was very lucky to have it.
Yeah.
Rika gets taken to Ravensbrück, where conditions are infamously terrible. So we kind of get a little bit of a back and forth between Waldemar, Waldy, and Rika in the movie. While these countryside guardians are ripping people off for food, but Waldemar actually is a much sweeter boy, and he tries to buy some of the people that are starving some food from his parents' wedding rings, and then the guy that's keeping him is like, no, never mind. Hang on, keep your wedding rings, I'll give them food. So he's making other people better people, which I thought was nice. I don't think this is in the book. Can't remember. But
either is the part where the Nazis are going to use him for leverage. I believe he just goes to live with his grandparents for a while, and then he kind of gets shuffled between family members.
Yeah. It's kind of funny and sad to me that the second Waldy is there without his parents, he becomes this commodity between the family members, and they like pawn him off from one to the other, and you take him now, and you take like he's actual, like he's cattle.
Yeah.
It's made me angry. Waldemar encounters Chardon in the camp, and he's in a pretty bad shape. I don't think this happened in real life. I can't remember. But he kind of helps him up. Waldemar is doing surprisingly well in the camp. He's pretty healthy still, and we get this from the letters that he sends to, I think it's his brother-in-law. I don't remember who he knows.
So May 3rd, 1945, it's the end of the war. Hitler's dead, and Waldemar's been put on a ship, the Cap Arcona, as the Nazis attempt to move evidence of the concentration camps away from the advancing Allies. And so, as you can imagine, if you go to the very tip top of Germany as far as you can go, you will reach the sea. And if once you're in the sea, you can go to Denmark or Sweden or any number of places that are the fuck away from where the Allies are. And so the Germans, there's not really a concerted plan at this point. If you read about sort of the end of the war from the point of view of the concentration camps, a lot of the time there were death marches, there were just killing people in droves. They were just trying to get rid of a lot of this evidence. And so they put all of these concentration camp prisoners on this ship, and there's not really like it's not really like we have this great plan of what's going to happen next. And of course, while it's sitting there on the water, the Brits see it from the air and they think that it's a German warship. And so they attack the ship and sink it. And the Cap Arcona was actually a German ocean liner. It was very briefly the largest and fastest ship on the Germany-South America route. It's like a big old, well, actually, it was the set of the German propaganda version of Titanic. So if you picture the Titanic, it kind of looks like that. The German propaganda version of Titanic was commissioned by Goebbels himself in 1942, but it never actually got shown in Germany for morale reasons. Like, Goebbels saw it and he was like, this movie's fucking depressing. It's going to be bad for morale. And they're like, yeah, dude, you asked us to make a movie about a massive shipwreck where half the people died. So anyway, that's what this ship got used for. And then in 1945, she was serving as a prison ship when the Royal Air Force, of course, mistaking her for a warship, bombed her. And it ended up killing 5,000 people in one of the largest maritime losses of life in World War II.
I want to add a little something about this mistaken identity of the ship, because that's a thing that's a bit, people aren't sure that they didn't know. Apparently, a lot of SS officials were on the ship. So there's this whole, like, apparently the higher-ups did know that there were lots of innocent people on the ship. But they also knew that there were lots of SS officers trying to escape. So it's like a thing, like, did they do it on purpose? Was it an accident? It's kind of up in the air at this point.
I think we can pretty firmly say that the pilots themselves didn't know, because
No, they didn't.
we do have evidence that they came back and they were like, yeah, we took out this Nazi ship. We killed all these Nazis. Like, there's no evidence that like, they knew that they were killing a bunch of civilians.
No, I think that's definitely been decided that they didn't know, but probably the higher ups, like, people did know. But, it's a war, like, it's messy.
I'm also thinking it's the end of the war. Things are super messy. The Germans are doing shit that was like not in the original plan. Like, I would just be hesitant because I'm like, I don't even think the SS knew that they were going to do this until like a week before they did it. Like,
no, right. It might have been a case of, like, information not reaching someone in time, too. So
I think in the book, they talk about some evidence. There's 2 different, I don't remember who it was, but British higher-ups who did get, like, notification that there were prisoners on the ship. But it was one of those things where, like, they got it the morning of and they didn't have a chance to read it. Or it was literally they got the information slightly too late or something like that.
it's Pearl Harbor all over again.
Yeah.
So Waldemar swims for safety. He's a good swimmer. So he's in the North Sea and he swims and he makes it to the shore. But then 2 kids, they're like, I don't know, they can't be much older than like 10 or 11, who've been recruited into the army by the Germans, shoot him. And
Yeah.
actually, I just want to say, in the book, we don't know this yet. We don't know what happens. We know about Waldemar swimming, but we don't quite know that he dies until the very, 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 very end.
Yeah. Well, even little Valdi didn't know how his dad died until like many years later when the author who was researching the book found out about it.
Yeah.
Well, it's July 1945. Valdi finds out that his mother has died. This is obviously a huge blow. He returns to Bertha and Marcel, his half-sister and his uncle, who tell him that they haven't heard anything from his father. They give him a letter that his mother threw from the train as they were taking her away. It's very sad.
Yeah, and then the movie ends with end cards, as it usually does for a war movie. It says, months later, Waldy received word that his father had died in the Cap Arcona disaster. It was a mystery to him how such a good swimmer could drown. 60 years after the war, he learned the true story when a new book about his parents revealed previously undiscovered facts.
Yeah. So the author of the book, the way she got into this was she had a work colleague who was little Valdi's son-in-law, little Valdi all grown up. And during her research, she spoke with, how do you say this name?
Kees de Kom.
Yeah, so she spoke with Kees de Kom, who is the son of a Black resistance hero named Anton de Kom. And this person said that he'd been in contact with the other swimmer who made it to the beach next to Waldemar that day. So Waldemar wasn't the only one who swam from the ship. There was someone else who also swam from the ship. And the swimmer told him how Waldemar died, assuming that Waldemar was de Kom's father, because he's like, well, how many Black guys were probably, around and in a concentration camp at the end of the war. The de Koms knew that their father, Anton, had actually died a week earlier in Stanbostel subcamp. And so they figured, well, it's not our dad. It's probably got to be Waldemar. And the Neuengamme concentration camp records confirm there was only one Surinamese man among the prisoners at that time. So it must have been Waldemar who was shot on the beach.
Yeah, it's so sad. Like, he makes it all the way home and then dies at the very end.
Yeah. The 2 kids who shoot him, they are just kids. Like, I mean, we've talked about this before about how the Germans recruited children and old men at the end of the war because there wasn't anybody left. And in the movie, they shoot him and then they're like, yeah, we're good soldiers. Like, you can tell that they don't have like the cognitive capacity to understand murder.
No, they're too young. Anyway, Rika is in a concentration camp with pianist and her mother. And the pianist is a young lady who sends a letter to Rika's family, letting them know that she died of dysentery at in early March 1945. Hilda and Jo, who are Hilda's Waldemar's sister and Jo's the man she married, I think, survived a Japanese concentration camps in the Dutch Indies. And they returned to Holland and gave Waldy a home, and they took him in the end. Willem was upset at the news of Rika's death, and then a year later he married the maid, so I don't know how upset he was.
Crucially in the book, like they mentioned that he never married Jans, and part of it was like he had this very old-fashioned idea of that like it would be disrespectful to Rika to marry someone else while she was alive, and so he waited until after she died to marry this woman. Relationship.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't really pick up on that. Thanks. Bertha, the daughter, was the only one who stayed in contact with Waldy for the rest of his life. His half brothers could not cope. Marcel kept searching for Waldemar, so Rika's brother, but eventually had to give up hope. And on April 16, 1945, Kees Chardon died of exhaustion in a labor camp near Nieuwenkammen. Of all the arrested Jews that stayed at Rika's pension, only double Franken survived the concentration camps.
Yeah, they talk a little more about the people who are staying in Rika's house in the book, and Franken had red hair, and so she could walk the streets and pass as a non-Jew, but the man that she loved was very Jewish looking, and so he constantly had to be in hiding, and she came back to the house one day and saw that he had been taken away, and like she could have gotten away, but she just didn't want to. Like, she didn't want to, go somewhere where he couldn't go to.
Yeah, she just turned herself in. And I think at this point, something I see a lot of portrayal of Jewish people, and even in documentaries, is that people are still, especially Jewish people, are still like, they think if I just obey the rules and just do what they tell me to, it'll be okay. Like, a lot of them thought like that. So, and we have the power of hindsight again. So it sounds really strange, but you do believe that as long as you do what they tell you to do, that it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Of the 140,000 Jews living in the Netherlands before the war, only 34,000 survived.
Yeah, man. That just makes me really sad. So Gerard van Hanningen, the SS guy, who has actually got a different name, was sent to Dachau. After the war, he moved to West Friesland, the Frisian Islands. Because of this, Waldy has never set foot on any of the Frisian Islands. Like, nope. As we already mentioned, Kees Kaptein was tried and executed for his crimes in the war. Waldy became a journalist. He married and had children. He lost his parents but kept afloat. Pretty cool.
Yeah. Real life Waldy had, they talk about this, I believe, in the afterword to the book, but he had a really difficult time. He never really got over losing his parents. And especially after they passed, he did get shuffled around between family members. He was a 15-year-old boy at the end of the war. And so, it's tough for his grandparents to take in a teenage boy that they didn't plan on raising. So he never really felt after his parents died that he was wanted by his family. And he really, really struggled with it for many years. And there's actually, I put in a quote from the book, but talking about his parents, he says, "If they had died in a normal manner, I would have had to attend 2 funerals and there would have been a casket at the front of the church with my mother's body in it," I thought. But fortunately, that wasn't the case. Otherwise, I would have had to walk up to it. Still, it was a shame because Mama would have loved to have had flowers on her grave. She once said she wanted to be buried in the churchyard on the Kerkhofflaan. Papa only wanted a stone. "No way, that's too cold and heavy," she would have said. Where are they lying now?
Yeah, Rika and her flowers. The flowers are in the book a lot, too. She loved flowers. So, that was the movie. I did also have some notes, but I already talked about most of them. I just want to talk about one more. Recent evidence has kind of brought to light who betrayed these people, and I won't go into it very deeply, but this guy was a Jew, so it feels extra harsh. And he worked with the Germans, and this was known for a bit longer, but it wasn't known that he was the one who betrayed Rika and Waldemar specifically. And he was a Jewish student, and he was part of the resistance, but also telling the Germans all kinds of shit about the resistance. He tried to save himself and his family, but they were all killed in the end. And like I said, both Confect and the Oranje Hotel are places my grandfather stayed at, so I will do more research, and as I find it, I will report back to the pod.
Yeah. Oh, man. The story about the betrayal is just really sad. Like, I know that theoretically you should be, like, furious with this guy for giving away these names, but it's like, I don't know, man. It sucks. He really thought he was going to be able to save his family by doing that.
Yeah, and he was arrested and let go quite a few times because he gave information, and then he lived for a couple more months, and then he was eventually sent to Auschwitz.
Yeah.
He died.
What he did is not right, but like just the whole situation is really sad.
Yeah. We're rating this movie Nazis in the Guest House out of 10. So how many Nazis in the Guest House out of 10 would you rate this movie, Sam? And the book.
Oh my God. I am going to rate the book probably 9 Nazis in the Guest House out of 10. It's just really good, y'all. The narrative is really interesting, and the way it's written, as we said before, is kind of like a novel. And it's just a story of 2 ordinary people. And you know, we talked about this a bit offline, but obviously you run into obstacles when you're writing about people who aren't famous. And so I feel like this was really a labor of love for the author. She obviously knew a real life Valdi, and she put so much work into researching this book. And he actually said, you know, when the book came out and they were making the movie, he told her, "You gave me my parents back," which is huge. And so the book is great. I'm going to give the movie maybe 6 Nazis in the Guest House out of 10. It's still the same great story, but I do find it's like a bit Lifetime movie. Like it all comes across a bit flat. There's not a lot of tension in it. I did feel like they maybe didn't have the budget to do the concentration camp scenes justice. So yeah, definitely not as good as the book. You?
Okay, I'll start with the movie. I'll give that probably 6.5 Nazis in the Guest House out of 10. I also didn't think it was great. I thought the acting wasn't fantastic, but I did like seeing all the Dutch scenery, and even the Suriname bits were interesting to me. Obviously, it's part of our country's history, but I didn't know quite that much about it. But then the book does that a lot better, so the book gets a 9.5 from me. I actually fed through the book, which is amazing for me. And I do really recommend you read it either in Dutch or the translation. It's really good. So that's going to get a 9.5. That's Nazis in the Guest House out of 10. And let's hope we never have Nazis in our guest house at any time, because we don't like them very much.
Yeah, you would react to like Rika if Nazis attempted to stay in our guest house, which is to say, fuck off Nazis, get out of our guest house.
Exactly. But yeah. Altogether, I really enjoyed this experience because it brought me closer to my grandfather again, and just lots of good Dutch history that I didn't particularly know about, and also some racist ancestry stuff, not for me, but for us as a nation, which is always good to be reminded of, despite how far we've come since. I enjoyed it, for sure.
Yeah, and you'll have to tell us all about it when you go and see the hotel and the camp.
I shall. Are you reading anything?
Oh, shit. Yeah. I'm actually reading 2 books. Let me get the one that I've been reading for a minute. Yeah. Don't think I talked about this one yet.
No, I think we haven't talked about books in detail in a while.
It's called The Hanging of Angelique, The Untold Story of Canadian Slavery and the Burning of Old Montreal by Afua Cooper. It's a nonfiction book about an enslaved woman who was accused of burning down her owner's house, and because this was in the 1700s when everything was very flammable, she ended up burning down a huge chunk of Montreal, and she was tortured. She did not confess to the arson, but she ended up being hanged for it anyways. And so the book is about her, but it's also about the backdrop of slavery in general and slavery in Canada in particular, which is a chapter of our history that a lot of people don't think about very much.
Sounds heavy.
It's taking me a little while to hammer through it because, as you can imagine, the subject matter is like pretty heavy.
Yeah. What am I reading? I did just finish reading Sonny Boy. I'm reading a book called Catch the Rabbit, and it's about this friendship between these 2 Bosnian ladies. I don't think I like the book, but I recently joined a book club, so I have to read it. And And I'm also reading about Dutch resistance. And I'm reading about the Cold Line still. And I'm just reading lots of things all at once.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Well, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can rate us 5 stars. You can visit our website, rosietheReviewer.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast.
We have a lot of fun podcasts coming up for you guys. So enjoy and see you next week.
Bye.